All right, welcome everyone. My name is Leslie Kirby and I'm the chair of the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We're delighted to have with us today Emily Baird-Chrisohon, sorry, who's the Narrative and Engagement Manager for TIRRC, the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Coalition. So I'm going to start off quickly by asking her to Emily, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in this position?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. I was born and raised in Alabama, North Alabama, and I went to college in Georgia. And I think I often mention my upbringing because I was raised by fairly progressive parents in a very conservative area. And I think that experience really informs a lot of the work that I do today. I grew up having to basically talk about the things that I believed in and my family believed in, and being told by a lot of people that those things weren't congruent. Being a person of faith, growing up in Alabama and being a Democrat, a lot of people felt were not did not go together, and that I thought that was very normal growing up where I did, and so it wasn't until I left that I realized that is not necessarily a normal conversation, and that there are a lot of people of faith who have a variety of political opinions. But that really informs a lot of the way that I think about things today. It also informs the work that I do around narrative change, because a lot of times I'll be speaking to people that are very similar to the people that I grew up and knew and learned to love, but had opinions that I don't necessarily agree with. And so having those conversations, I think most of my life really prepared me for a lot of the work that I do today. But after college, I worked in Nairobi, Kenya, in between college and grad school. And then I moved to Nashville, Tennessee to start my Master's of Divinity at Vanderbilt. And I came into Vanderbilt with the desire to do interfaith work. And right after I graduated from Vanderbilt, I worked for a program that ran for Religions for Peace USA, that ran a program called the Our Muslim Neighbor Initiative that organized around Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry. And through that work, I had a lot of more exposure to the immigrant and refugee community. And that really heightened my desire to work on that front. And so when this job opened up at TIRRC, that was focused on narrative change and helping move people along the spectrum of support, it really seemed to fit my background. And I've been at TIRRC for about 3 years.
Wonderful. I think you have a few slides that you want to start off by showing us today. Why don't we start with that and then transition into our questions?
That sounds great. So yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of background about refugee resettlement for everyone. I just think it might be a little helpful to have this information before we talk about where the refugee resettlement program is right now, and kind of what the news that we're seeing around it. Can everyone see my slides right now? Okay, excellent. It's taking a minute to load. So the definition of a refugee is a person who is unable or unwilling to return to his or her home country due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, membership in a particular social group, political opinion, religion, or national origin. I think it's helpful to note that this definition it centers on credible fear of persecution. And that is actually the same for someone who is a refugee and an asylee. These are different legal terms, but the basis of them are the same. What differs is how that person basically comes to live in the United States and the legal process that takes place. So a refugee is someone who applies usually in a third country, sometimes in their country of origin in a resettlement camp. They apply outside of the country to a separate program to be relocated. And then that relocation is determined by the organization. They don't choose, like, I'm going to come to the United States. And they are placed in the United States. For us, we have a separate program that screens refugees again in order to move here. And then they are placed with an independent resettlement organization to help them with the transition. An asylee is someone who arrives at the border or in the country and requests asylum based on the, again, well-founded fear of persecution. So that is the legal route, to show up at the border, or once you're already in the country, to claim asylum. And you actually have a whole year after entering into the country before you need to come forward and request asylum. So I'm going to mainly talk about refugees today, but I just wanted to note that because I know there's just a lot in the news around refugees and asylees. So I'm just going to share this quote. The U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program reflects the United States' highest values and aspirations to compassion, generosity, and leadership. I absolutely agree. This is from the U.S. State Department. This just goes to show you that refugee resettlement used to be a very bipartisan issue. It was not something that was really debated. It was just accepted that this is something that we need to do as a country. And again, it was supported on both sides of the aisle. So it's really been under the last few years that refugee resettlement has come under fire. Another thing to note is that refugees go through the most stringent vetting process of anyone who moves to the United States. That is something that is not understood very well. As you can see here, sort of at the bottom of the screen with all those numbers, this is the number of meetings refugees have to take in order to enter the process. So it is a very long process. It is a very hard process. And only less than 1% of globally displaced people ever are resettled as refugees. I mean, it is really a difficult process. So when you hear people talk about, oh, we need to vet refugees more, it's a little strange to say that, because they are already vetted and everything errs on the side of caution. So if there's any red flags, that person is taken out of the program. So the refugee resettlement program, as we know it, really started after World War II. It came out of, in World War II, people being turned away, seeking safety. And we know what happened and what an atrocity that was. And so there was a recognition after World War II that there needs to be a system in place to offer refuge to those who need it. But the formal structure was formally adopted in 1980 with the Refugee Act. And since then, the US has resettled about 3 million refugees. We've really been leading the way since World War II on refugee resettlement. We usually settle about 95,000 refugees a year, and Tennessee has averaged about 1,600 a year. I have not updated this slide. So unfortunately, in the past 4 years, we've seen the refugee resettlement program be slowly dismantled. And we've gone from resettling about 100,000 refugees a year to 15,000. That's the part I haven't updated. So it's we are at a historic low of resettlement, and it's really an abdication of our moral responsibility and what we have come to know as a really important program in our country. And it's also helpful to note that the height of resettlement happened. We were settling about 200,000 refugees a year. And that was between the Reagan and Bush administration. So again, these were conservative administrations where we were resettling the most people. The last thing I want to note is that we are really in a crisis as far as displaced people in the world. We have about 68.5 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. This is the highest ever. It is higher than World War II. So we're basically at a time where we have a historic high of displaced people, and the US is at a historic low of acceptance of refugees. So again, it is the worst time for us to be limiting the number of people that we are accepting. And it's also important to note that most displaced people end up in undeveloped countries and countries that don't have the resources and the infrastructure that we have to help resettle individuals. So they're really receiving sort of the brunt of this issue. So I will stop sharing my screen from now. And Leslie, would it be helpful for me to give a little update on where we are with the resettlement program now, or would you like to kind of delve into that through your questions? What would be easiest?
Why don't you start with that? So give us a little update, especially on what's happening in Tennessee.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of you've probably seen the news recently around refugees and so I'll try to break that down a little bit. So the Biden administration, when Biden was running for president, one of the things that he promised is that he would raise the refugee resettlement ceiling back to 125,000. This is, a lot of advocates have been pushing that this really should be the cap. This should be the norm. We should be resettling 125,000 refugees every year. And, we can go above that, but that really needs to be the ceiling. So Biden said, yes, this is something that I will do, and I will up the number of refugees to 62,500 midway through the year, right? Because we're already halfway through the year, so you can't, we wouldn't be able to settle 125,000 this year. And so 2 weeks ago, we were expecting the Biden administration to come out and say, we're upping the number to 62,500. Fortunately, one thing he did is he did take away some of the restrictions that were in place for the resettlement program, which was a good thing, but he did not raise the ceiling. So he kept it at 15,000. Quickly after, there was a backlash from organizations throughout the country and progressive Senate and House leaders pushing the administration and saying, this is, you promised this and you're breaking your promise. So because of that pressure, later that night, the Biden team came back and said, oh, actually, no, we've always been planning on raising the resettlement numbers, but we are going to do so on May 15th. We were a little confused as to why this is, because actually waiting until May 15th, there are some people who were prepped and ready to be resettled. And because of this stalling, they are canceling flights. A lot of their, the things that they've had approved are going to expire. So really waiting a few months is not just waiting a few months. It has dire consequences. We also don't really understand why the administration decided to not up the number. There's a few theories, but we don't know for sure. We think some of it might have to do with a lot of the news around asylees at the border and a desire, even though the infrastructure for those two are different. So it's not like one affects the other. They're in the same branch, but they are different employees. And so that's not really a great excuse, but we think maybe that might have been part of it. And again, we're not exactly sure. And this is really so far, this is kind of one of the biggest areas where the Biden administration has broken their promise. So we're putting a lot of pressure on the administration right now. And there's a lot of confusion around come May 15th, what the administration will do. We've heard floated that it's going to be less than 62,500. We've heard a few days ago that the administration, that number is back on the table. We've heard from federal partner organizations that it's maybe going to be closer to 50,000. We just don't know. It's very confusing right now, but we are going to continue to put pressure on that administration before May 15th that, 62,500 should be the number. And there should be an absolute promise that come next year that number will go up to 125,000, period. And I'm actually going to, please ask me a question, but I'm going to plug in my laptop because I just realized that it says it's about to die and I don't want that to happen.
No, just one clarification point. You mentioned at the beginning that we're at a world record, not the kind of record we would want in terms of numbers of displaced people, 68.5 million.
Absolutely.
Of those, you said about 28 million of them are either refugees or asylum seekers. What are the rest of them? So you had them listed as internally displaced. So for those who aren't hugely familiar with immigration lingo, can you tell us what internally displaced means?
Absolutely. And thank you for your patience while I plug in my laptop.
Sure.
Yes. So a person that is internally displaced means that they have been forced from their home, but they are still within the borders of their home country. So most, or right outside the border. So most internally displaced people are usually in a refugee camp along the border of their home country, but they're not able to return to their actual home because of violence or, war, destruction, sometimes environmental impact. But that's what we mean by internally displaced. And a lot of people that are internally displaced are never really put into the refugee resettlement program. And so the terminology can be confusing. And because we might see someone who's internally displaced, like someone might say like that person is a refugee. Yes, that person is seeking, they need refuge, but that they're not necessarily labeled a refugee legally, because they're not put into the refugee resettlement program.
Understood. Avi, I think you have a question about our congressional delegation. Do you want to start with that?
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Avi.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
What a grand celebration last night.
Yeah,
That ribbon cutting was just remarkable.
yeah. Well,
Facility looks great, and you guys look so comfortable there already.
oh, thank you. Well, thanks for attending. Yeah, for those of you that don't know, we had our ribbon cutting for our new building last night, and if you were able to attend, thank you for being there. Unfortunately, it had to be virtual, so we only had a few of us in the building that are fully vaccinated, and we're able to be together. But hopefully, we'll celebrate with more people soon when we're able to. But yeah, thank you. I'm glad. The building, I agree, the building is beautiful. We're so glad to be here. I'm here right now. I'm in a room by myself, but yeah, we're so excited to be here, and just can't wait for all of you to come visit us and see it.
Emily, what I wanted to ask you about is our relationship with our congressional delegation on immigration issues.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you're familiar with an organization called HIAS.
I am. I don't follow their work super closely, but I am familiar with them. But if you would like to, yeah, tell me more about them.
HIAS is the Jewish community's arm into the immigration and refugee world.
Yeah, I've utilized some of they had some really wonderful, I think Deborah sent me some information from them one time when I was compiling some resources for World Resettlement or Refugee Day, and we were doing a weekend of prayer. They had some really beautiful prayers around resettlement, and I was able to use those.
So actually, they're the oldest refugee organization in the country.
Wow.
And it was extremely active when we were helping Russian Jews escape and come into and resettle. Yeah. But now that there isn't a real need for Jewish resettlement, HIAS is almost exclusively working in Latin America and parts of Eastern Europe. And they just reached out to us about forming a delegation to speak to Cooper and Haggerty in particular. We don't know much about him. He was a foreign service officer. Maybe he has some empathy. Blackburn's not been very helpful.
No,
but
no, we don't.
I'm just wondering if we might work together in calling on Cooper and Haggerty. And that was one question. And are you guys already doing that is probably my first question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And yes, I mean, that would be great. We would love to work together on pushing our elected officials. Unfortunately, you're right. We don't have a lot of luck with our representation here, specifically Blackburn. She is very anti-immigrant, has made that very clear from the beginning. We don't have a lot of hope as far as Haggerty is concerned. I mean, I think there's maybe a little bit more hope there than Blackburn, but we don't feel great about it. We have met with their representations and are starting those conversations, but I haven't heard an update about if anything is going forward with that. I think Cooper, yes. I mean, we should definitely put pressure on Cooper. We are talking to resettlement orgs across the state right now, and would love to, for y'all to maybe be a part of that conversation around how they're feeling and what maybe they're wanting to do. We have a tentative plan to have some sort of action or movement prior to the 15th to show that we, want to continue to put the pressure on the administration. And then, we've also been talking about what if they don't keep their promise and how do we want to respond? We don't have any clear-cut plans right now. I think that we probably we'll discuss that more, next week and the week following. And so as part of that conversation, I'm happy to let you know once we have it and sort of are moving forward and when we know more. And then please keep me updated too, because we're wanting to hear from local resettlement orgs right now about how they're feeling and like kind of.
Yeah, because Highest just reached out to us, and whether, I'm not sure where organizationally our federation is, but Highest is reached out to individuals and would love to talk to you about that.
Okay, that's great.
A different question, and that has to do with the Jewish community worldwide, and what the Jewish community has always been extraordinarily active in refugee resettlement. That's our heritage here in this country.
Of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the experiences that our people are having in Europe become alarming to people here. The Muslim exodus into Europe has been huge.
Yeah.
And it has been not an easy one. I don't think Europe has done nearly the job we have at helping people settle and assimilate, and we do a much better job here. So there's lots of unrest, and some of that unrest has been Muslim anti-Semitism and incidents, which are isolated incidents. It's not endemic to the whole migration movement, but they're dramatic enough that it causes Jewish people to be concerned. And unfortunately, it taints some of the attitudes we have to face here. And I'm only asking that because I commend TIRRC and the refugee movement in this country, because we have done such a better job at helping people become part of our fabric, and not they don't come and stay second citizens because of people like TIRRC.
Well, thank you for that. It is I follow what happens in Europe somewhat. I'm not as well versed in it, and their laws are different when it comes to resettlement and asylees. Every country has different laws, and so I do know that their asylee system has always been different in Europe and than it has been in North America, where they have a system based on that you're supposed to claim asylum in the country of arrival, where in North America, our systems up until the Trump administration, the idea was that you claim asylum in the country of your choice. And so you have the right to show up at the border and ask for asylum. So I think obviously the laws have make differences in how resettlement works. And then I think I don't know enough about how the infrastructure is built in Europe, but I do know that in the US, like we have such a long-standing infrastructure around refugee resettlement. And I think that is obviously a big part of what makes people successful, and that system in place is really important. And one of the things that was so dire about the lowering of the resettlement ceiling is that a lot of refugee resettlement orgs had to close, or they had to let staff go. And so we've really dismantled not just our priorities, but we've dismantled the system and it's going to take a while to rebuild that infrastructure. So there's a longer term consequence than just a year-to-year basis. But I'm hopeful that we will see the infrastructure rebuilt quickly, because I do think it's a longstanding tradition for us, and a source of pride for our country that we have the resettlement infrastructure that we do. So,
Emily, can you talk to us a little bit about locally what happens? So part of your work, which Avi just referenced, is that you don't just dump people in a new town and let them fend for themselves. So what happens if I am one of the lucky few who gets to resettle through TIRRC? What kinds of supports are you offering people to help them in the resettlement process once they're here?
Yeah, so a good thing to clarify is that we at TIRRC are not a resettlement organization. We center on advocacy, policy, and we do offer some services. And so we partner with resettlement orgs in the state to advocate for their, what the priorities are for them. But we ourselves are not a resettlement organization. But resettlement organizations such as NICE, Catholic Charities, World Relief. Those are some examples of resettlement orgs in Tennessee. They, when someone goes through the refugee resettlement process and it's determined that they will go to the United States, that person is linked up to one of the resettlement orgs here in the United States. And then when that person arrives, this resettlement organization is really there to help them with resources for about the first 6 months is a priority, sometimes beyond that. But that organization will help individuals with, housing, help them think about job training, help that person if they need to get connected to English classes. A lot of times these organizations work directly with faith communities. And so sometimes faith communities will sort of work directly with a couple of refugee families. This happens a lot. And so that faith community will form a relationship with them and help provide other resources that they need. We at TIRRC sort of see ourselves as hopefully the next step for individuals that are newly arrived. We want to help that person plug into their community, help advocate for them, and also help empower them to advocate for their communities. So that's sort of the next step. And then we are also here to identify problematic legislation, fight against legislation that's bad, and help introduce legislation that would be helpful for our community. So for instance, one thing we keep hearing is that we really need the driver's license test to be offered in different languages. So that would be an example of something we're hearing from our resettlement partners. And that's something that we're noticing is a priority for people. So the idea and the hope that we can then help advocate for that would be an example of what we do. But a lot of times, yeah, people think that we're a resettlement org, but we don't work directly in that way. So.
Right. I'm interested in the narrative piece of your title, and you referenced narratives earlier. So I think people are pretty clear on what engagement means, but talk to us a little bit about narrative and the role that plays in your work.
Absolutely. So a huge bucket of my work is narrative change, changing the public opinion. And that's a big idea, right? So this idea that I'm here to help shape and move public opinion. And we do that through a lot of different means. So I give a lot of presentations, what we would call like Immigration 101 presentations. So speaking to communities that have a lot of maybe misunderstandings about the immigration system and helping complicate that for them. And then again, helping people that are already supportive of our work plug in better, and then speaking with people who don't, help move them along the spectrum of support. So the narrative aspect of my job refers to one, like this broad narrative, this idea that we have to persuade public opinion, we have to bring people onto our side, we have to educate people about the immigration system in order to win. And so what is this broad public opinion? What is this broad narrative that we're telling? But then I think there's also the aspect of like, what are the individual narratives that we're telling, and how are we empowering our members to share their narrative, and recognizing that narrative and story are really impactful. So a big part of my work lies in this method called deep canvassing. And some of you might be familiar with GOTV canvassing, but maybe not as familiar with deep canvassing. And so GOTV canvassing, you're knocking at someone's door asking them to support a policy or a candidate, but deep canvassing is trying to garner support for a broad issue. So for us, immigration. So you're at someone's door for like 15 to 20 minutes, you're having like a relational one-on-one with them. And the center of that of deep canvassing is narrative story sharing. So what we're doing is we're trying to understand this person's concerns. We're asking good questions. We're like actually wanting to know how they feel. And then we as the canvasser are sharing our story. So we're sharing our story around immigration, whether that be ourselves, a family member, a friend. We're sharing the story of that individual about their journey. And then we're asking the voter to then share their story about maybe they know someone who's immigrated. And we're hoping to connect in this emotional way because we know facts, unfortunately, don't really move people. People don't, I wish they did. I wish I could like hand somebody a fact sheet and they would just be supportive of immigration, but that's just not how it works. People move or people make decisions based on emotion. So we're hoping to have an emotional connection with this person at the door. And then we're going to share a story around struggle and compassion. So we're actually going to ask this person, when was a time that they received compassion in their life when they really needed it. And so again, we're hoping that by listening to their story, sharing our story, that we're building connection and we're helping that person see their struggle in line with somebody else's and like what they might want if they were in that situation themselves. And so narrative is, again, the center of what that looks like. And then also asking really good questions, active listening, being present with that person is a big part of it. And so another part of my job is I'm always looking for the next sort of narrative technique and what we can use to be, to tell our story, to tell the story of our members and help people understand those and be more supportive. So.
That sounds very compelling, but also very time intensive. And I'm imagining you haven't been able to do that during COVID. So is this?
So actually, we have not been able to be on the doors deep canvassing during COVID, but we transitioned to the phones. And so something COVID gave us the opportunity to do is that we have been we were part of a project, a national project that was testing the use of deep canvassing on immigration. And we were able to show for the first time that it was statistically significant in moving individuals, which was really exciting. And we were actually in our second phase of canvassing when the tornado tore through downtown Nashville and then COVID hit. So though we were obviously very disappointed to not be able to finish on the doors, it did give us the opportunity to test whether deep canvassing can be as effective over the phone. And what we found is that not only is it as effective, but it might actually be more effective over the phone, which is really exciting. So we can use these techniques around story sharing and empathy and active listening, and those can translate to the phones. So we are right now we've actually just launched our campaign around deep canvassing on refugee resettlement specifically. So if anyone out there is interested in learning or they're interested in doing some of that, we have some paid canvassers that are working right now as we iterate our script, but we'll be bringing volunteers on more in the future. So that's something you're interested in, please let me know. But yes, it's obviously a challenge right now. We'd love to be back on the doors as soon as possible. It has made some other parts of my work challenging, the parts of my work that really are about relationship building and bringing individuals together for conversations. Like we were in the middle of a listening session or a listening session campaign, and those were scheduled to be in person. So that also had transitioned to the phones and looked a little different than we were expecting. So I think we're meeting the moment, but we're definitely excited to get back to normal interaction as soon as we can. So
Emily, if I could jump in for a second. I think what you might find among people in the Jewish activist world is interest in returning to educating our community on issues related to immigration. We had a coalition going back a number of years ago that had 20 organizations and 1,000 people, and we were really upping the ante and helping people understand why we needed national immigration reform. And I think our Jewish Roundtable, and I'm only speaking for them without asking them, but I know what they think. our roundtable would be interested in engaging in helping return to that education platform. We're hearing, and I'm sure you are, that even Republicans for the first time are talking about increasing the number of visas from Mexico, our countries. That's been our biggest problem, is so few visas are issued, so they come in without them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to increase the number tenfold, and you'd have less illegal immigration. So we need to help our community understand, so Nashville can be a positive voice in advocating for reform. So I'm just raising our hand, our roundtable, and I know individuals are interested in returning to that strategy.
Yeah, I think education is really important. I think having these conversations is very important. And, we at TIRRC can't be everywhere, and I can't be everywhere. So we need to help, empower our members and empower our allies to have these conversations with their neighbors. That's so important. I mean, I get asked all the time, like, how can we help? And obviously contacting your representative is so important. Donations when needed is so important. But honestly, what we need you to talk to your neighbor, and we need you to talk to people in your community, because that is a huge, huge part of what we do. And you're right. I mean, the immigration system has not been updated in over 30 years, and we're really due for it. One of the statistics I share with people often that is surprising is that the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber of Congress have said that we need about 200,000 visas in this what you would call unskilled labor visa category to function, just for our economy to function, like for our economy to not fall apart. We actually think that number, those two organizations don't normally agree. One is more progressive, one is more conservative, and so we think that number is probably conservative. It's probably more likely that we need about 300,000 to 400,000 just for our economy to function, and we give out 5,000. So
that's exactly right. And not only that, Emily, we used in our campaign, we used the number 400,000.
Yeah, I think that's more accurate. I think 400. I think 400,000 is more accurate. So yeah, we are 195,000 visas short of what we need for our economy to function. So we need to be telling that story. We need to be advocating for immigration reform, absolutely, and then we need to be helping people understand. The story of individuals in our community that are undocumented, and we need to help people understand that that undocumented individuals are a part of our communities, and that they also don't need to be demonized, and that so we've done deep canvassing around undocumented individuals as well, and that's an incredibly important thing, and helping people realize that we want compassionate laws, we want humane laws, and we want the people that have been a part of our communities for 20 plus years to not fear driving in their communities, to not fear going to the hospital, taking their kids to school, these things that undocumented individuals really fear a lot all the time. And we really need to have a pathway for these individuals and have a conversation around, we've got 11 million undocumented individuals in our country. And so what are we going to do, and how are we going to meet that moment in a compassionate and humane way? So that is also a very important conversation and needs to be had.
Emily, let me just follow up, and then I'll turn back to Les. When we talk about those visas, and we need unskilled 400,000 unskilled workers a year. That's a year. The truth is that the visas are run out by the third week in January, because we only give out 5,000 to 10,000.
Right.
And we need 400,000. And then people say, well, why don't you wait in line? There is no line to wait.
No.
So I think, I'm wondering, does TIRRC, we had a platform, a 4 or 5 pronged platform for comprehensive immigration reform, that the Jewish community, that TIRRC, Conexion, all the partners, we all spoke to the same platform. I could pull out the platform we had 10 years ago. It's probably similar to what it would be today, but this TIRRC have an updated platform
We do. I mean, we have signed on to some platforms and suggestions on immigration reform for some national partners. And there have been some very recent iterations of that as the Biden administration was coming into power, with the recognition that, this was something that really needed to happen soon. So yes, we do have some updated platforms, and we also have a platform that we made a couple of years ago that's more Nashville specific around what we're asking for in this city. So we have both of those, and I'm happy to share those.
Because I think if we have a wide reach, we would share that platform and speak to the platform. I think if we all had the same talking points, and we wouldn't be far apart even if we disagreed on something.
Yeah.
But we had a common platform. We've kind of gone away from that. So if you could send it to us, or we could work with you on creating that, we still have our partners we could share it with.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think we would take the lead from some of our, like I said, some of our national partners, but I'm happy to get that and pass it along, because you're right. I think the more that we can all stay on message and be saying the same things, the better. So yeah, I'm happy to look into that. And if you, for some reason, don't hear from me in the next couple of days, just send me an email and remind me.
I will reach back to you, because
that sounds great.
The roundtable would like to work with you on that.
No, that sounds great. I'd love to share that.
Got a question in the chat about DACA. Can you update if you have the Biden administration's kind of current stance, which I know might be shifting a little bit on DACA?
Yeah. So I think, the first thing is that when the Biden administration took office, DACA was, we knew that DACA was going to stay and was safe, and the administration too, it made it so that new applicants could apply. So that was a big part. For a while, we were really in a holding pattern around new applications, but I believe new applicants can apply now. And we actually at TIRRC are working with a lot of DACA applicants. That's a big part of our legal work right now, is helping people apply for that system. So that was obviously a big win. And then, we really need a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients that is more permanent, and that's going to need to come through Congress. And so there are a few hopeful bills that have been introduced that we are keeping an eye on, and we are hopeful that they will include a pathway to citizenship for DACA for youth, but also for their parents and for the community at large. And some of those bills have had great success in the House, but we're still watching in the Senate. And so we don't have anything comprehensive right now. We're again putting pressure on the administration to come up with a solution to pass reform, but I don't necessarily have a better update at this time. We're just watching things as they go. But again, the good news is that that DACA is not in danger like it was anymore, and that people can apply. So that is the good news. So if you know anyone who's eligible for DACA, please get them, tell them to apply. You can send them our way. And I wish I had a, more comprehensive update at this time, but I do not.
Does anyone else have a question that they want to ask? Tina, do you have yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to make the comment. Emily, I asked the question basically because it's been so difficult for our high school graduates to be able to afford college, where they have to pay out-of-state tuition at state colleges.
I know it is really so. Some of you might know, I'm sure you do, that we have been pushing for tuition equality in Tennessee for a long time now. It has been something that we are continuing to work on, and as you said, it is really a shame that we have students that have graduated from a Tennessee high school, have gone to school, with their friends and colleagues their whole life, and a lot of them don't even know that they aren't have the same access to funding for tuition that their friends will until they're like a junior or senior. But yeah, if you are an undocumented high school student, then you have to pay, as Tina mentioned, you have to pay out-of-state tuition. And so that means a lot of students cannot afford to go to school. So that is a campaign that we feel really strongly about, that we're continuing to push for. And that, you know, you'll see us continue to push for. It's a really important thing. But yes, if you know, Tennessee high schoolers that don't have DACA but would be eligible, like, please have them apply. So,
All right. Anyone else have a question? Avi has another question, but before you go, Avi, I would just want to pull the audience and see, since it's been a you and me show, is there anybody else who wants to ask a question for right now? Okay, Avi, go ahead.
One thing I'd like to see us get ready for is there's going to be some kind of decision made on legitimizing people that are not that are undocumented. And we took away the right to drive. And other states, including my home state, Illinois, has always let these people drive cars. And it's crazy that we have them driving around without driver's licenses. So as we get closer to them having a pathway, we need to get that legislation back up on the table. And maybe we can start talking out loud about how ridiculous it is that we don't let them get temporary driver's licenses.
Yeah. So y'all have actually named 2 of our priority campaigns for next year. Thank you so much. So tuition equality it has been priority, but it's going to continue to be. And then driver's license is we've already named as a big priority for us in next legislative session. So we're going to be doing some work and hopefully some deep canvassing around it, so we can convince communities that we need, that driver's license is really important, and that we need to convince our elected officials that it's important so that they can pass this legislation. Okay. So yes, thank you for naming our priorities there. And you're absolutely right. Like you said, we used to issue driver's license, and that's incredibly important for people with families trying to go to jobs. It really, and so we'll do a big campaign around convincing the public about how important it is. So,
do you have other priorities? So the tuition and the driver's licenses, are there other priorities for the upcoming year you want us to know about?
Those are our legislative priorities. I mean, we'll also be always keeping our eye on anti-immigrant legislation. That's always a big, in the past, sometimes we have unfortunately had to use resources to kill a lot of bad bills. And so we haven't been able to focus as much on positive legislation. This year was really the first year that we, there were a few anti-immigrant bills introduced, but we were able to kill most of them, in committee. But it was very minimal compared to past years. So we're hoping that speaks to the power that we've built and the success that we've had in the past. And we're hoping that will continue next year. But obviously, we'll keep our eye on harmful legislation. But those, I think, are going to be our main legislative priorities. We're obviously going to be working in 2022 to help our sister organization, TIRRC Votes, will be working to get pro-immigrant elected officials in office and fight against anti-immigrant candidates. And then, we'll continue to have some priorities from, the public opinion stance and things like that. But if you're talking just to legislative priorities, that's going to be our main focus. I'm not the policy director though. So if she tells me we have other ones, I'll let you know, but that's what I know right now. So.
All right. Sounds good. So you mentioned possible need for volunteers to help canvass earlier. Yeah. We have a large group of activists in our community. Are there other volunteer needs that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. Deep canvassing will be a big one coming up. I'm trying to think if we have need for any other volunteer things at this time. Since we're not in person, we just don't have as many needs. We'll be doing something around the food crawl again this year. It won't be, the same big food crawl in person like we normally do, but there's usually a lot of opportunities end of August, September to volunteer around that. Right now, we are taking donations to help some families that were affected by the flood. And so if anyone wants to donate, we're looking for grocery gift cards. That's what people really need right now. So I'm actually going to be here on tomorrow. And if anyone wants to come by and bring some tomorrow, that's short notice, but we can take them other times. So if you want to donate any, I've heard that Kroger and Walmart are the best, but I'm sure people would love food gift cards from anywhere that you'd like to donate. Our volunteer, I haven't talked to our volunteer coordinator in a while if there's other specific needs. I mean, I would keep a lookout on our, email and Facebook and stuff, but nothing else is coming to mind at this point.
Okay. And then my last question was actually going to be about the food crawl. We had a big group from our committee go the last, I guess it was 2019 in the before times. So I'm glad to hear you're planning something for this year. So it won't be in person?
What I have heard is that it won't be. I think the pandemic would have to dramatically improve for it to be. I think we'll do something similar to what we did last year, where it's kind of like food events that happen within the same week or two time frame. So last year we had some events where you could order and pick up food, baskets and things like that. I think that there might be an in-person event around the time. I think if the pandemic's okay, obviously we'll take safety measures and there will be distancing and stuff in place. So I think that there might be an in-person event, but there's not going to be the large scale food crawl, because we just can't, logistically with COVID, won't be able to safely have people on buses and in large amounts of people in restaurants and things like that. So hopefully that will be back in 2022, because I know we all love the food crawl and love the support we get from the community in it. So.
For sure. And for those of you who haven't been, it's an amazing time. Is it usually Labor Day weekend, or is it? Yes. Okay. So right. If you haven't been, they have buses and they meet up at the fairgrounds, and then they take people around to different immigrant-owned restaurants in Nashville. It's a fantastic day and very informative. So if you haven't been, definitely make plans to go in 2022 and support whatever they're doing for that this year. It's a lot of fun. Any final questions for Emily? All right, our group is quiet today.
Well, it's been wonderful to be with you all today, and I hope I was somewhat informative and hope that this was a good conversation. So
you definitely
the only thing I would add, Les, is that TIRRC has been an incredible foundational asset for this community for as long as I've lived here, since David Lubell started the organization 20 years ago. And TIRRC gets much applause for the courageous work that it does. And a lot of the work that TIRRC does is on the ground during emergencies. And it is amazing how TIRRC responds to crises when they occur. And much applause to all of you, Emily.
Thank you, Avi. I really appreciate that. I always appreciate your support, and thank you for those kind words.
And thank you for joining us today. It was very informative, and we appreciate you taking the time, and we look forward to partnering with you again in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone, for joining.